You hear them before you see them. The ravens. Their calls echo across the stone walls of the Tower of London like harbingers of something unspeakable. It's May 19th, 1536, and the morning mist clings to the ancient fortress as if trying to hide what's about to unfold. You stand among the crowd, pressed against bodies that reek of sweat and anticipation. The scaffold before you is freshly built, its wooden planks still bleeding sap. But something is wrong. This isn't the traditional execution platform England knows. There's no axe gleaming in the morning light, no block worn smooth by the necks of the condemned. Instead you see him, a man in foreign dress, his movements precise and deliberate as he tests the weight of something in his hands. A sword, not the crude, heavy blade of an English executioner, but something elegant, deadly, imported from France specifically for this moment. The woman they've brought here, she was a queen just days ago. Now she kneels in the morning shadows, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that makes your skin crawl. And Boleyn, the woman who brought down the Catholic Church in England, the witch, they whisper, the seductress who bewitched a king. You feel the dampness seeping through your boots from the cobblestones, slick with dew and something darker. The air tastes of iron and fear around you. The crowd shifts restlessly, their breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. Children peer between their parents' legs, not understanding what they about to witness, but sensing the gravity that weighs on every adult face. The tower looms above you, its ancient walls bearing witness to centuries of royal blood. These stones have seen the deaths of kings and queens, of traitors and saints. But today feels different. There's something theatrical about this execution, something calculated and cruel that makes your stomach turn even before the first blow is struck. You watch Aeson rises to her feet with the grace of someone born to command rooms full of nobility. Even here, even now, she carries herself like royalty. Her gray dress, not black, not the color of mourning, but gray like smoke, like something being erased, catches the weak morning light. There's no crown on her head, no jewelry adorning her throat. Henry has stripped her of everything that once marked her as queen. But he cannot strip away the way she moves, the way she holds her head high. Even as she approaches her death, the French executioner steps forward, and you notice something that chills you to the bone. He's not looking at, and with hatred or disgust. There's something almost respectful in his demeanor, professional. This is a man who has done this before many times. His sword catches the light, and you realize with growing horror that this isn't just an execution, it's a performance. Every detail has been choreographed, from the foreign executioner to the unusual method, from the carefully selected witnesses to the timing of his death. As you watch her compose herself with an otherworldly calm, you begin to understand the horrifying truth of what you're witnessing. This isn't just an execution. This is theater. This is Henry VIII, masterpiece of psychological warfare. A death so calculated, so deliberately barbaric in its apparent mercy, that it would echo through history as both the most civilized and most savage ending ever orchestrated by an English monarch. The ravens grow louder, their cries mixing with the whispered prayers of the crowd. Someone behind you is weeping softly. A child asks his mother why the lady looks so sad and receives no answer. The executioner tests his blade one final time. The steel, singing through the morning air with a sound like a distant bell tolling. You smell the temps, carrying with it the scent of fish and decay. The morning wind picks up, stirring the mist that clings to the tower walls like ghostly fingers. Somewhere in the distance, church bells are ringing for morning prayers, their holy sound a grotesque counterpoint to what's about to unfold on this scaffold. And speaks, her voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. She praises Henry as a gentle and merciful prince. But there's something in her tone, a note of irony so sharp it could cut glass. Even facing death, even stripped of her crown and her dignity, she finds a way to deliver one final insult wrapped in silk. She asks for prayers for the king, and somehow those words sound more like a curse than a blessing. You realize with dawning horror that Henry isn't just killing in Berlin, he's erasing her. This exotic execution, this foreign method, this careful choreography, it's all designed to make her death as un-English as possible. Even in dying, she will be other, foreign, strange. The woman who once commanded the respect of ambassadors and the fear of Catholic Europe will die like an outsider, executed by foreign hands with a foreign blade. The blindfold is brought forward, silk bearing the royal arms, Henry's final touch of psychological cruelty. As they tie it over her eyes, you see her lips moving in silent prayer. What words is she speaking to her God in these final moments? What secrets is she taking with her to the grave? And Berlin was not just killed, she was erased. And you're about to discover exactly how a king destroys not just a life, but a soul. Welcome to Dark Diaries, where we excavate the bloodiest, most haunting stories history tried to bury. What you're about to witness isn't just the death of a queen, it's the birth of a new kind of royal cruelty. One that would define Henry VII's reign and echo through the centuries as the most barbaric execution England had ever seen. If stories like this disturb you yet fascinate you, then you belong here with us in the shadows of history. But I warn you, once you know the truth about Berlin's final moments, you'll never see Henry VIII the same way again. When she returned to her homeland, she carried with her something rare. Not only beauty but an intelligence sharpened by observation and experience. She was quick-witted, fiercely ambitious, and unafraid to command attention in a world where women were expected to remain silent. It was these qualities that drew the gaze of a king. Henry VIII, already restless in his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, became intoxicated by her presence, unlike the docile women of his court, and did not yield easily to his advances. She refused to be his mistress, denied him the easy path of indulgence, and in doing so she fed his obsession. The more she resisted, the more determined he became. For Henry, this was not mere desire. It became an obsession that would shake the foundations of England itself. What began as private longing soon turned into political revolution. Henry sought to cast aside Catherine, his queen of 2 decades, because she had given him no surviving son. Yet divorce was forbidden under the laws of the Catholic Church. To possess Henry would wage war not with armies, but with faith itself. He tore England from Rome, rejecting the authority of the Pope, and in doing so severed his kingdom from centuries of Catholic unity. And was no longer simply a woman, she was the living emblem of England's defiance. Every whisper of her name carried the weight of rebellion. She became both the promise of renewal and the cause of division. To her supporters, she represented the dawn of a new order, one shaped by reform and a powerful queen beside her king. To her enemies, she was the serpent that had lorded Henry from God and crown alike. Her intellect only deepened the threat she posed and was not content to play the silent figure at Henry's side. She involved herself in matters of politics, religion, and reform. She spoke her mind in council, advised the king, and surrounded herself with men of learning and ambition. She was bold in a world that punished boldness in women, and for that she was feared. And Berlin's rise was meteoric, but it carried with it the seeds of destruction. For in Henry's court, power was never secure. Favor could shift like the wind, and the very qualities that made her irresistible would soon be recast as arrogance, pride, and heresy. But in Henry's court, the higher you climbed, the sharper the fall. If you believe stories like deserve to be told in full without compromise, then stand with Dark Diaries by subscribing. If you choose not to, ask yourself, why should the voices of those who defied kings be silenced yet again? Once Henry VIII had been the golden prince of Europe, tall, athletic, handsome, and learned. He dazzled his subjects with the promise of a ruler who would bring England glory. He was a king who jousted, composed music, and debated theology with scholars. To many he seemed the very embodiment of Renaissance majesty. But the man who began his reign in triumph was not the man who condemned Boleyn to die. Years of disappointment had already begun to corrode his spirit. But the transformation into something darker, something crueler, came in 1536. During a joust, Henry suffered a devastating injury. His horse fell, crushing him beneath its weight. Though he survived, his leg was shattered, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. The pain was unrelenting, the infection constant. No longer the vigorous athlete he had once been, Henry grew swollen, sedentary, and consumed by suffering. With each passing day his body decayed, and so too did his tolerance for defiance. This injury did more than scar his flesh. It altered his mind. Those who had once known him as a lively companion now saw a king who was suspicious, volatile, and easily enraged. Every glance from his courtiers was measured. Every word weighed for danger, for the court had learned that Henry's moods could shift in an instant. Laughter at dawn could give way to executions by dusk. Men and women alike learned to speak in riddles and half-truths, fearful that one careless phrase might be twisted into treason. At the heart of Henry's torment was a single consuming obsession, a male heir. His first queen, Catherine of Aragon, had given him only one surviving child, Mary, and her sex rendered her unacceptable in his eyes. And Boleyn, for all the upheaval he had endured to have her, had given him only a daughter, Elizabeth, and miscarried the sons he craved. To Henry, this was more than personal disappointment. It was a threat to the very legitimacy of his reign. The king's need for a son infected every decision, every alliance, every betrayal. Ministers rose and fell according to their ability to feed this obsession. Friends were discarded without warning. Those closest to him, men who had shared his table, his secrets, his hunts, were suddenly condemned as traitors when suspicion crept into his mind. None were safe, not even a queen. The court became a theater of fear. Nobles who once boasted of their proximity to power now sought the shadows, knowing that one smile too warm toward the queen, one word spoken in her defense, might summon the tower's iron gates. Betrayal became the currency of survival. To live was to bow lower, speak less, and watch silently as others were destroyed. Henry VIII, the Prince of Promise, had become a tyrant, and under his gaze, and Boleyn's fate was already sealed. The downfall of Boleyn did not begin with truth. It began with a plot. At the center of that plot was Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, a man of cold calculation and ruthless ambition. Cromwell had once been ally, but alliances in Tudor England were as fragile as glass. When, and began to threaten his influence over the king, she became not a queen to be protected, but an obstacle to be destroyed. It was Cromwell who constructed the case against her, weaving a web of lies so intricate that escape became impossible. The charges were shocking, designed not only to condemn, but to annihilate her reputation. She was accused of adultery with multiple men of the court, accused of betraying the king with his closest companions. She was accused of incest with her own brother, George Boleyn, a claim so grotesque it was meant to poison her memory forever. And she was accused of treason, the most damning of all, a crime that demanded death. But the timelines betrayed the truth. Some of the affairs she was accused of committing supposedly occurred when she was pregnant or had only just given birth. Others were said to have taken place when she and her alleged lovers were in entirely different locations. The impossibility of these accusations mattered little, for the verdict had already been chosen. Facts were not weapons in this battle. Fabrications were. In Cromwell's net were 5 men, each dragged into the darkness of Anne's destruction. Sir Henry Norris, once Henry's trusted friend. Sir Francis Weston, young and unguarded. William Brereton, a courtier caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mark Smeen, a court musician of humble birth, whose confession was wrung from him under the cruelty of interrogation. And George Boleyn and his own brother, whose eloquence and dignity could not shield him from the vilest of charges. The cruelty was not limited to death sentences. It was psychological, calculated, smitten, beaten, and broken. Confessed to crimes he did not commit. His words twisted into the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Others were pressured, threatened, and silenced, forced into a corner where denial itself became proof of guilt. Each man was sacrificed not for what he had done, but for what the king demanded. This was not the pursuit of justice, it was the choreography of power. A staged performance where every accusation was rehearsed, every piece of evidence manufactured, every outcome preordained. It wasn't justice, it was theater, and was cast as the villain. If you believe these truths deserve to be laid bare, subscribe to Dark Diaries, and if you choose not to, then explain in the comments why these voices crushed beneath the lies of kings should remain unheard. The stage for Anne's final humiliation was the Great Hall within the Tower of London. There, beneath vated ceilings heavy with shadow, England gathered to witness a spectacle disguised as law. Presiding over the trial was Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, and his own uncle, whose loyalty to the crown outweighed even blood. His task was not to judge, but to deliver what Henry demanded. Array before him sat 26 peers of the realm, each hand-picked for their dependence on royal favor. They were not chosen for their impartiality, but for their obedience. Every man knew that to acquit and was to condemn himself. The verdict had been written long before the trial began. Their role was to recite it. The prosecution poured forth accusation after accusation, weaving together a grotesque tapestry of crimes both petty and monumental, and was accused not only of adultery and treason, but of mocking the king's poetry, of jesting about his clothes, of boasting that she would marry one of her lovers should Henry die. The charge blurred the line between capital crimes and trivial slights, burying her beneath a flood of shame, and standing alone against this tide, defended herself with sharp clarity. She pointed out the impossibilities in the accusations, the contradictions in the timeline, the sheer absurdity of the charges. Her voice, calm yet unyielding, carried the intelligence and wit that had once captivated Henry. But in that hall, reason was powerless. Her arguments did not pierce the armor of fear that bound the judges. Every denial, every assertion of innocence fell into silence, ignored by men who dared not hear. When the time came to speak their verdict, each of the 26 peers rose in turn, voices cold, words mechanical, all declaring her guilty. Not a single man faltered. Not one voice rose in hesitation. And Boleyn, Queen of England, was condemned to die by fire or by the sword at her husband's pleasure. When even queens had no voice, who will speak for them now? Dark Diaries keeps their memory alive, unless you would rather silence win again by not subscribing. Henry called it mercy. He ordered that, and should not meet her death beneath the crude swing of an English axe, but by the clean stroke of a foreign sword. An executioner was summoned from Killala, a man famed for his precision, whose blade could sever a head in one motion. Yet this was no act of compassion. It was theater, an imported spectacle designed to cloak barbarity in the trappings of refinement. The cruelty began long before the blade was drawn in her cell and endured days of torment as the hour of her death was announced, then delayed, then announced again. Each postponement tore at her mind, feeding her a false hope only to snatch it away. Hope and despair became her torturers, grinding her spirit into exhaustion. This was the true punishment to break her long before her body was struck. When the morning finally came, and was not permitted the small mercy of laying her head upon a block. Instead, She was made to kneel upright, hands bound, her neck fully exposed. She would remain conscious, aware of the executioner's every step, the swish of his blade through the air until the final instant. The posture robbed her of any shield, forcing her into a posture of vulnerability that amplified the terror of her last seconds. Her death was not meant to be private. 1,000 witnesses gathered within Tower Green, carefully chosen to observe, to remember, and to carry the king's official truth into the world. Ambassadors, courtiers, servants, even common citizens stood in grim silence, their eyes fixed on the woman who had once been the most powerful figure in England. Their presence was not accidental. It was deliberate. Henry ensured that when and fell she would fall before the kingdom itself, and even in death, indignity pursued her. When her body crumpled to the scaffold, no coffin awaited. Instead, her remains were stuffed into an arrow chest, the rough wood splintering against skin that had once worn a crown. Buried hastily within the tower grounds, her grave was left unmarked, as though she had been a servant, not a queen. In this final act, Henry struck not only at her life, but at her memory. Every detail was calculated to erase not only her body, but her legacy. Dawn broke gray and heavy over the Tower of London. The air was damp, and the stones of the fortress seemed to drink in the sorrow of the day. Within her chamber in Berlin prepared herself for the end with the calm precision of a woman determined to face death with dignity. She dressed in a gown of muted gray damask, chosen deliberately, so that nothing would hinder the executioner's stroke. Over her shoulders she placed a mantle of man, a last echo of her queenship, and on her head a simple headdress to veil the trembling of her hair. She gathered the few possessions that remained to her, trinkets stripped of their former splendor, yet rich with meaning. With steady hands, she distributed them to her attendants. It was a parody of the grand ceremonies of gift-giving she had once presided over as queen. Where once she had bestowed jewels and titles, now she handed out keepsakes, humble tokens of remembrance. Each gift was a silent farewell, an acknowledgment that loyalty to her had come at a price. When she mounted the scaffold, all eyes fixed upon her. The crowd strained to hear her words, for the condemned were permitted a final speech. Anne, even here, remained careful. She did not proclaim her innocence with fury, nor did she curse the man who had brought her to this place. Instead, she praised Henry, calling him a good and merciful king, and begged the people to pray for his soul. It was not flattery, it was survival for those she left behind. She knew that any accusation, any bitter truth might bring destruction upon her daughter Elizabeth. Her last words were not for herself, but for the fragile future of her child. She knelt upright, her hands bound. At her own request, a blindfold was tied across her eyes. She whispered prayers, lips moving steadily as the executioner circled behind her. The great sword of Kalala, long and gleaming, was lifted into the air. It was the weapon of knights, of warriors honored for valor. And now it was turned against a queen, its symbolism twisted into an act of calculated irony. The blade fell, swift and precise. Her lips were still forming words of devotion as her head struck the straw. There was no cry, no resistance, only silence, a silence more terrible than sound. Within hours of Enneline's death, the court moved with chilling efficiency to erase her. The scaffold was cleared, the blood-sodden straw swept away, and her body hidden beneath the earth as if she had never reigned at all. 11 days later, Henry VIII stood beside Jane Seymour, his new queen, as though it had been nothing more than a shadow passing through his reign. The marriage was celebrated, with feasts and fanfare, while the memory of the woman executed on Tower Green was buried in silence. The courtiers who had once bowed to and shifted their loyalties overnight, they praised Jane with the same voices that had cheered in coronation, proving that in Henry's court, devotion was measured not by love or honor, but by survival. No one spoke her name. No one dared remember her. It was as if she had been deliberately erased from the kingdom she had once helped reshape. For her daughter, Elizabeth, the consequences were immediate and brutal. The child of a queen was now declared illegitimate, stripped of rank, and branded a bastard. She would grow up under the shadow of her mother's disgrace, a reminder of the scandal that had consumed England. Yet fate, with its cruel irony, would one day raise Elizabeth to the throne her father had denied her, making her one of the greatest monarchs in English history. Anne's bloodline, though condemned, would outlast the king who sought to destroy it. Beyond England, the world watched with unease. Foreign ambassadors wrote of the trial as a sham, a grotesque display of tyranny. Even those who had despised and for the upheaval she represented saw through the lies that condemned her. Europe recoiled at the brutality, recognizing that this was not justice but spectacle, not law, but vengeance disguised as order. Button's blood didn't just stain Henry's hands, it rewrote England's future. If you believe her story deserves to echo across centuries rather than fade into silence, stand with Dark Diaries by subscribing. If you turn away, ask yourself, why would you let the memory of a queen erased once before be buried again? And Boleyn's execution was more than the death of a queen. It was the ultimate demonstration of Henry VIII's absolute power, the proof that no bond, neither love nor marriage nor crown itself, could stand in the way of a king's will. Her beheading was not justice served but power displayed, cold and merciless. It revealed a kingdom where law bent to fear and truth was silenced beneath the demands of tyranny. Her fate is a warning carved into history. In Tudor England, even queens were disposable. The throne offered no protection, the crown no sanctuary. Favor could transform into fatal accusation overnight, and those who dared to rise too high risked being struck down not only in body, but in memory. And story is the reminder that ambition in a world of unchecked authority could end not in triumph but in obliteration. But her death speaks to something larger than one woman's tragedy. It speaks to the corruption of justice when power is placed in the hands of the paranoid, the cruel, and the unchallenged. It shows how law becomes theater, how trials become executions in disguise, and how silence becomes complicity. At Dark Diaries, we drag these dark truths out of the shadows. If you don't subscribe, ask yourself, are you any different from the courtiers who stood silent while Boleyn was destroyed?